everyone, and welcome back to Chats with Kat on the Voice of Adoptees podcast. I am your host, Kat, and I hope you're all having a wonderful week so far. Don't forget to grab your coffee, tea, or a preferred beverage and settle on in. I am currently here with Eva, who is an author with her new novel, 38 Days of Rain. It's in stores now, and it's online. So, Eva, briefly introduce yourself to those who are listening.
Hi, so I'm Eva. I'm 24 and I'm a contemporary fiction author. I grew up in South London. My mum actually moved there from Rhode Island in the US when she met my dad, biological dad, who is British, and he was traveling America on the Greyhound. Oh, nice. So they dated for a few months and then got married really fast, moved to England, and then split basically as soon as I was born, if not a little bit before, I think. So I was then raised by my mum and my stepdad from Cyprus, who later adopted me.
Okay. So let's talk about that story. Let's get into your adoption. Tell me all about it. So you're from the US, or?
So I was born in London, right. And yeah, my mum kind of raised me on a lot of American stories and stuff. So I definitely felt a lot of connection there from a young age. And then with my stepdad being from Cyprus, I really connected there as well. And actually, I now live in Cyprus. Oh, okay. So it had a really profound effect. And it wasn't until I was living here and I was 21, 22 that he was able to adopt me, because I still had a relationship with my biological dad in the UK. And essentially for my stepdad to have adopted me under 18, I would have had to be kind of signed over almost by my biological dad, which we knew it wasn't even worth having that conversation, essentially. So we waited, and then I think legally in the UK, I don't think you can adopt anybody over 18, but then we all moved to Cyprus in 2021, I think, early that year. And we did the adoption then, because there's not that limit here.
Yeah, like that's, well, just a side note for a second, that's actually quite recent, 2021. That was only a few years ago. Oh my goodness. So how did that really impact you as you were going through it? I feel like there would be a lot of just fear and confusion.
Yeah, it's definitely not a typical adoption story, I'm realizing, because I'm still, as you say, really quite new to this space, I guess. And hearing all these other stories from people who were adopted mostly at birth or very young out of foster care, I definitely wasn't, I don't know, I suppose you don't really engage deeply in a lot of conversations unless they kind of affect you. Sadly, it's probably not a good thing. But now that I have experienced this, I'm kind of listening a lot more to podcasts like yours and talking to people who were usually adopted much younger, and kind of comparing my experience to theirs and finding similarities and differences in it. And I think something that's really stood out for me is that overall, in terms of my relationship with my stepdad, now adopted dad, it's been so positive. It was my choice. It was something that I wanted for a really long time. And I was really, really shocked. I understand it now. I've listened to a lot more of it, but I was so shocked initially to hear the kind of divide that exists between a lot of adoptees and adoptive parents. It's just not something I would have ever considered coming from my side of it, I suppose. But I think I had a lot more of the sort of trauma side of it with my biological dad. So I would say I almost experienced what a lot of adopted kids do in reverse, if that makes sense.
It does. No, it very much does. Something beautiful about the adoptive community is just this huge, overwhelming sense of camaraderie, of group, of kind of protecting each other and rallying behind each other. So at one point in your life, especially like on your website, I know you were talking about having multiple names. Tell us more about that journey. Why do you feel like you had multiple names? What does that mean?
So my middle name was actually my mum's maiden name. And then my surname obviously was my biological dad's. I then got married when I was 22, so I had a new name there as well. And I also, during my adoption, took on my stepdad, now adopted dad's name, which meant really a lot to me to kind of connect with my family here and stuff, which I'd always felt very much a part of. And yeah, I guess the name thing was really stark to me because, bearing in mind, I was born in England, my mum's American, and my adopted dad is Cypriot. Every time we went through airports to visit family or anything, we were always stopped because all of our passports showed that we had different nationalities and different surnames to each other, because my mum never took his surname either. So it's good that I really look like her, because people were constantly questioning us and kind of, do you have a right to have this child? So so the importance of names was something that really stuck with me from a young age.
I think the importance of a name kind of goes along with the sense of identity for adoptees. I mean, for each person on the planet, all you have is, one of the only things you have is your name. It's attached to your story. So is there a particular name that you really identified with as you were going through life? And, now I think you said really about taking the name of your stepfather and how important that is to you and how meaningful that is to you. If you had a name, like, which one out of that is your favorite? Because it's a little complicated. It actually reminds me of like the Russian setup of the name, where it's like your name, this person's last name, or the middle name, and then the other person's like last name. So it can be a little bit complicated, because it's almost like your name is not your own. It's someone else's name that's trying to be yours, but you're like, it's not really mine. So I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah. Sometimes I talk in metaphors.
No, it does completely. I think especially with a multicultural element to it as well. That's definitely been my experience, because, again, for me, growing up in England and being white and sounding English and everything, I really was passing for someone from an English household, which I wasn't. And because I grew up in a really multicultural area of London, I was very lucky with that. I basically didn't notice that I had foreign parents, because lots of people around me did too. And again, my experience in that area, or just in general, really, looking the way that I look and things, I would never have been made to feel that I was in any way different to other people there. Whereas, I know that if I had looked different or anything, or had an accent, obviously that would have been a really different experience. And the only things that really are different between me and other English people who looked like me, were the names. And so I think that was really important too for me, was just that sense of like belonging within different parts of my family. And thinking, okay, no, I don't look like you, I don't sound like you, but we share this name, and that's really important.
I got to be honest, something that is also very interesting to me is what you just said about how I don't look like you, I don't sound like you, but we share this name. I think many, many adoptees feel that way, where you kind of just know that you are not related, or it's like you don't click with the other members of your family. So it's very interesting that you mentioned that, because I was thinking about that earlier today, where it's just, we adoptees, we have like this sense that we don't necessarily belong, or like we just don't know, or whatever it is. And then it's almost like when you find your family, there's a whole unconscious sense of, this is it, like, this is my family, this is my blood. Like you have that sense of knowing. So before we get into your book and really talking about that, and I'm really excited to learn more about it, but for the novel entitled 38 Days of Rain, what was your inspiration for the fictional story? Well, what was your thought process? What came to you? What was the brainstorming looking like? Where did it come from?
So, to be honest, it is heavily inspired by not so much my experiences, I would say, as the feelings that I had about this kind of duality of still having a relationship with a biological parent, whilst undergoing adoption by someone else and kind of what that experience is like, because it's so, again, it's not beat for beat my own, but the emotions in it are really rooted in mine, and it honestly helped me kind of piece a lot of things together for myself. And I also thought, I don't know, I do think it's something that other people will be able to relate to, even if mine was not a typical experience being adopted older. And again, I think there is just that feeling of I've done it in reverse.
Right.
So where you were saying about, finding your family and thinking this is where I fit, and maybe I didn't quite connect with my adoptive family. For me, it was so the other way around, because I would be in my home with my mum and stepdad at the time. And I'm not saying it was, kind of a place without rules or manners or anything like that, because we were perfectly fine, polite with each other. But compared to my biological dad and stepmom's house, they are very English, very typically English, in their kind of manners and everything like that. And I don't know, whenever I visited there, it would be every couple of weeks. I was just always made to feel like I was rude and like I wasn't doing things properly, because I don't know, it sounds like I'm really stereotyping English people, but it really was very strict in terms of no elbows on the dinner table. You always say, yes, I'm good, thank you, how are you? And I would never be asked to say that kind of thing at home, because that's just not really done in the cultures. I don't know, it's not so uptight. And I didn't think I was being rude, but then I would go to this other house and it would be kind of a really stark difference. So I didn't click with that Englishness, even though I was born and raised in England, because it just wasn't. It wasn't what surrounded me most of the time, or what I was comfortable with. So a lot of the book was kind of exploring how can you grow up being told that you're something and looking and sounding like something, and actually it doesn't resonate with you at all, almost. And what happens when you kind of try to have both things, and do they work alongside each other or not?
So for those who are listening, this entire time I've been just furiously like shaking my head up and down, just nodding as Eva as she's talking, because what I relate to what you just said in such a deep level, because that was my life. Even though I was adopted when I was a little bit younger, I mean, it was very, very strict. I think a lot of adoptees, regardless of when they were adopted, can understand where their either adoptive parent or whomever might have been strict. I mean, it was the same thing for me. Like, I may as well have, you were always in your Sunday best. You didn't put your elbows on the table. You said please and thank you. You stood up straight. I'm slouching right now. My mother would have a heart attack. But you would get dressed and you would make sure you looked your best when you went outside. Otherwise, you'd have to go upstairs and change. I mean, there were so many formalities for me even. And like when you're speaking, I hear you and I internalize it because I get that. And when I actually went to a different state, because my mother she had passed, the lady who I was with, who's a very good friend of my mom's, she's so laid back. She's like, you can wear jeans, and I'm like, jeans? Oh, no. Katie, we take our shoes off inside the house. What do you mean you take your shoes? Like, okay, like you take them off outside so you don't drag the stuff inside. Like, it took me a while to adjust, even being here in the UK for right now. And I mean, my boyfriend is very chill and calm. So it's almost like a culture shock, a shell shock in itself. Just the differences. I can't imagine how difficult that must have been for you, just going back and forth, like every so often, and how different the two worlds are. And I think this is a very, very important thing that you're touching on inside of this fictional story in this novel. So, I mean, you were talking about this as an adoption theme or a lesson. And I mean, I think it is, I'm very excited because I think it's an important one. I feel many adoptees will relate to that. But what other adoption themes or lessons can come from this story? that you feel personally that other adoptees may be able to relate to?
Well, I don't know if it would be so common amongst adoptees, but I don't know. Another interesting thing that kind of inspired me to put it together in the first place was that around the same time I was being adopted, I was told that I would not be able to have children. And so I started thinking to myself, okay, so maybe this is not the last time I will be in these rooms having these conversations. And it was very strange kind of looking at my then stepdad and thinking, maybe 10 or 20 years from now, I will be sitting where you're sitting, and I'll just be kind of on the other side of the same place. And so that was another really big element to the story, was kind of around the subject of adoption, the main character finding herself both as adoptee and prospective adopted parent, maybe even though she's quite young and she's thinking ahead and she's just kind of considering, what does this mean, and what is the experience of being caught between both positions in that, because they are wildly different, kind of as we touched on before. And, you know, I think there's so much caught up in both of them individually, let alone when you kind of bring them together. So yeah, it kind of explores it from a couple of angles.
Yeah, because, well, your tagline is what matters more, your place as a mother or as a daughter. So I feel like you kind of just summed it up. I was about to ask you like what that means. And I was almost going to say, like, how do you feel like you investigate that throughout the story within the weaving of the chapters? But so
there is
yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, don't even worry. I should have, because I was more like, when I read that, I was like, what does this mean? Like, it's a very strong sentence. I feel like us talking about what we had just talked about, where you're saying like, maybe one day I'll be in this position. It's kind of like you're sitting in the middle and you're like investigating the two sides. I would just love for you to go a little bit more deeper into that.
So without giving too much away, because it does kind of come later in the book, another major theme is immigration, which again came so much from my parents both being immigrants, and then I myself am now an immigrant. And obviously with adoption, it's something that is, I mean, it's brilliant, and the emotional side of it is obviously really important, but I think you can't only focus on that without acknowledging the legal loopholes and things like that, right. Which it is actually really hard to adopt. And I kind of started to realize that when I was looking into it around that time, and just thinking, okay, as someone who is not living in the country that I was born in and things like that, you know, a lot of adoption companies want you to have lived in the country for at least a year or two. And they want you to intend to stay and things like that. And you just kind of think, well, what if I don't know? What if I can't commit to that in good faith? And what if I'm not making enough money, and all of these kinds of things? And so with the immigration side of it, it's, again, I don't want to give spoilers, but there is kind of a choice that the character has to make between whether she wants to secure her status as kind of a daughter of a place, or whether she wants to move towards being a mother in the only way that she believes she can at the time.
I just think it's a very deep, powerful sort of sentence. It's something to really think about, especially where you just mentioned it, like in terms of just immigration in the battle that this particular character has to face. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting read, very powerful. So you also have another novel. It's mentioned on your website. It's called Love and Only Water. Okay, so that tagline is, can you be whole when your world is halves? Now, okay, what does that mean? Because I think it's just, these taglines are very well written. And what I like about them so much is they make you think. I am a thinker. So I would love to have this discussion and see what this means and what is the meaning behind this specific tagline.
So that one was not about adoption, but again, kind of exploring a mixed background and identity, and this kind of idea of a duality of sorts. And so the character again has parents from different places, and the way that I wanted to reflect that was in talking about the Cyprus problem, which obviously there is a divide in Cyprus since the invasion in 1974. And so there is kind of a buffer zone, and if you can cross, but it's a hard border, and it's very much something that the main character in that story feels reflected within herself in terms of her cultural background, and then also in terms of her sexuality as well, and just trying to figure out, okay, I'm two things, I'm neither thing, I'm, you know, and so it's just really heavy on themes of identity, and yeah, just figuring out who you are and where you're from, really, and what that means for you.
So if this question was asked to you, how would you respond to that? Like, what, you know, I'm just curious, like, how would you respond?
Oh, it's really hard. It's obviously a difficult topic because I know people have really, really strong feelings on nature versus nurture, and I think that's something I'm really fixated on personally, because I believe 100%, definitely in terms of identity, in nurture over nature. I just, again, it's going to be so subjective, and everyone's opinion will be informed by their own experience. Right. But for me, I have always felt Cypriot. I have always felt very much connected to Cyprus and to my family here. And I know, again, I don't look like them, I don't sound like them. And I think it's especially complicated given the colonial history here, because I really don't look or sound like someone who should have an opinion on the politics or anything like that. You know, that's not ancient history with the British in Cyprus. So I do try to be really careful kind of how I come across in certain conversations, and just be mindful of saying, you know, I know how I present, but my history and everything and my heart is here. And once people get to know me and they know my family, it's, you know, they understand. But I know that appearances can be really deceiving on that.
That's, yeah. I just feel like it's a very, very tough sort of spot to be in. And for me, like, I commend you so far along your adoptive journey, and how far you've come, and the fact that you've written not just one, but 2 novels is really, really incredible. So I think you should be very proud of yourself for that.
Thank you.
And like, so how, if we're going to get into a little bit of psychology for a second. So how has writing your novels helped you navigate your adoption story? How has it helped you get through it? Sort of. Yeah.
It's been amazing. I mean, I've always written since I can remember. It's just how I process everything. And the new book, 38 Days of Rain in particular, because again, it's so rooted in my own feelings around the adoption, and trying to juggle that with still having a relationship to a small extent with my biological dad. It helped me really understand, because I think you can try and put things together in your own head, but there's something about writing them down, seeing them on paper. It's just like having it reflected back at yourself in a way that is so much clearer. And I can't recommend that enough to people. Even if you don't want to publish it, you don't want to show it to anyone, just writing things out to help yourself grasp them better is amazing. So that's been really useful for me. And also as I wrote, not because I was writing, I don't think, but just alongside it, my feelings on the whole thing evolved massively. And I'm aware, even as I'm talking, this is kind of a moment in time, and maybe that will continue to happen. So I'm not saying, you know, this is how I feel and it's fixed, but I think when I went through the adoption, I had in my head that I was adding a parent and not replacing one. And because it was happening here and my biological dad was there, I didn't even need to tell him about it, and he need never know or anything like that. So we never had that conversation, and it was just something that was for me, and it helped me to feel connected in the ways that I wanted to feel connected to my family. And then, you know, I was writing the book and I was thinking about it more and more, and carrying on with my life here and having less of a relationship with him.
Right.
And I kind of started to notice, this is not good for me. This is quite damaging for me to be trying to hide something that I feel is a really integral part of who I am. And that's why I've made this decision. And so I think writing really helped me to come to that conclusion, actually. And so I'm not, I am open about it now. And it's still strange to talk about it, but I am much happier doing so.
So what's the difference between you when you wrote your previous novel, Love and Only Water, and you writing this novel, 38 Days of Rain? How have you grown along with the novels you've written?
I think I have come to the conclusion that, and this goes for real life as well as in fiction, it's not necessarily, I don't know how to phrase this.
It's okay.
Creating a likable character is not necessarily what's going to make the best story or what's going to make people connect with the character the most. And actually, I think I really tried to make the character overly likable in the first book. And in the second one, it was so much more raw and kind of gritty. And I think for a lot of the book, the character is not very likable, but already people are connecting with her so much more because I think that is, no one's perfect. You can't think that just because someone seems sweet or anything like that, they're going to be more appealing to people, because I don't think anyone has that view of themselves, really. So
I think you just mentioned something, and it gave me an idea or a sort of question where I believe when we write, especially, I'm like you. For me, I'm a writer. When I write, clarity. It is 100 times more clear. When I speak, it's almost like I have trouble. It's almost like there's kind of like a little barrier, but when I'm writing and I'm able to see the questions or see whatever it is that I'm writing down on the paper and read it back to myself, it's clear as day. So you growing along with your novels, with the characters in the novels, and you seeing how one character, like you said, you've made more likable. You wanted that character to be liked. Does that reflect you by chance, where it's like, because this was my experience, and I know this is many, 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 many adoptee experiences, and I'm not speaking for all adoptees right now, but I'm speaking for myself, where there was a point in my life where I wanted to be a people pleaser. I wanted everyone to kind of really, really like me. And now at 30, 31, it's like I've come into my own, where I'm more raw. I feel like I'm more real. I'm gritty, kind of like you said. And I feel like what you just described is a beautiful metaphor for like the journey throughout life. And it's almost like when we write, we see the reflection in ourselves because we're writing about ourselves, essentially, right? So,
yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's completely what I was doing without realizing it almost. I think, I wasn't intending to write myself, and I think I wrote what I thought I should be, in a sense. I kind of, maybe it came again from that place of I was always made to feel like I was rude, and that just stuck with me so much. And I think I went out of my way as I got older to kind of really try and make myself not be rude, just be pleasant and ask a lot of questions and always be polite. And I don't know, I think a lot of that came out in that character for sure. Whereas I then moved past that in real life, and I saw that it's really not, I don't know, I think I was fixated on it a lot more than it should matter. And I'm not anymore. And I understand that a lot of what I thought was a me problem was literally culture clash. And I just couldn't have articulated that as a 10-year-old. It took me a long time.
Right. So do you feel like you've matured along with your character? Or, for me, I'm kind of like, oh, okay, I'm going to read this novel, and like, I feel like there's going to be a clear difference between the first one and the second one. Right. So I think
Yes.
It's almost a way of memorializing kind of like our own journey through writing, through creating these fictional stories, which is really, really beautiful. What would you say is the ultimate power of creative writing, and how it's really helped you?
Oh, another really tough question. It's almost impossible to put into words, which I know is really ironic.
Yeah.
But it's, I could probably explain it on pen and paper much
Right.
better. It's just so liberating, because I think a lot of the time there are passages in this book, again, the 38 Days of Rain, that I kind of almost slipped out of the character and started writing things that I wish I could say to certain people around the adoption experience. And they're just things that I never could have said to those people directly.
Right.
But if you don't, then, and you don't write about them either or talk about them to anyone, they're just going to stay there and kind of, I don't know, just weigh on you.
Right.
And that goes away when you take them out in writing, for me anyway.
Yeah, it's almost like that weight is kind of, it's off your shoulders and it's onto the paper. It traveled through from your mind to through your hand and your fingers into the pen, into the ink, onto the paper, and it's almost like a way of like releasing it, because there's pressure when you write with a pen, right, or when you type with your fingers on the keyboard. It's just clack 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 clack. So you're channeling whatever it is like into the work itself. It's, I don't know, I just think when there's other adoptees who also write, and I think each story is very powerful. Each story deserves to be heard. So based off of that, like, do you intend to write and publish more books and kind of continue to chronicle this sort of journey you're on, is with, like, maybe it's a different character, maybe it's the same character, like, I know it's very, very new and very early to kind of like brainstorm, but I don't know, like, I wonder what you got going on up there in your mind.
Yeah, there's always something. I do have another idea for a story, and again, it would have a main character that had been affected by adoption. I think I've become really taken with this community and all the experiences I've had in such a short space of time. And now the stories I'm hearing from so many others as well. So it's definitely sparking a lot of inspiration.
I don't know, the power of art and the power of writing and the power of just community and coming together. What would you say, from having found the adoptive community, what would you say is one of the most powerful stories that you had heard? Something that really sticks with you and you remember it and you're like, I understand exactly what that person feels. I get it.
So this was, it was actually a family friend who I knew was adopted. She's an old friend of my mum's. And I had never kind of spoken to her about her history on it. And recently I found out that when she went to meet her biological mum, I think the adoption agency basically encouraged them to write letters to each other before they met.
Okay.
And so they were writing letters back and forth for quite a while, a few months. And then my mum's friend received a letter the day before her birthday that year. And it was her biological mum saying to her, I'd really like to call you on your birthday. And my mum's friend kind of realised, I can't get a letter to her in time to tell her my phone number, but I really want to speak to her on my birthday. And so she thought, how can I make this happen? And the only thing she could think to do was have flowers sent, because, they arrive the next day, to her biological mum's house, and it had her phone number on it. So their first conversation was able to be on her birthday. And I just thought that was probably the most touching story I'd heard.
I agree. That's absolutely beautiful. I can't think of something. I just didn't expect that. Like, it makes sense because flowers is like you said, the next day. So I would not have thought of that. It's really touching, and it's just beautiful, and it just adds another layer. It adds another layer of storytelling, right? Verbal storytelling, written storytelling. Yeah. So it's just so powerful, and I know you as a writer, you understand the power of words, the power of writing, the power of storytelling. Do you have So one more thing, or well, one or two more things. But do you have a quote from 38 Days of Rain that is it's just there. It lives rent free in your mind.
Oh, that's really hard. Off the top of my head, yeah, I think there is. And it kind of brings together all of the themes, which I suppose the main themes are infertility, adoption, and immigration. And there is a moment when the main character is going to the migration department with her adopted dad. Right. And she kind of understands, I'm not like an Anglo-Cypriot, British-born Cypriot biologically, so I don't get a passport like someone in my position would if I was biologically related to this person rather than adopted. And she's really frustrated, and she's saying that it should be the same. I have exactly the same relationship to this family and this culture as anyone would, and it has to be the same, because I think the line is, it should be the same, it has to be the same. Otherwise, what kind of solution is it to an absent father? What kind of absolvent is it of an absent father? What kind of solution to the inability to conceive a child? Ooh. And that's kind of her feeling about adoption overall.
Wow. Okay, that's very powerful. I feel like that's a mouthful, and that's a bunch of feelings. Wow. That's a very good quote. I agree. It sums up all of the different themes that you were talking about, but it's very powerful, and I understand why it lives rent free in your mind. So where can others who are interested in reading this book find it, and where can they buy it?
So you can find me on Instagram at ava.asprakis, and the book will be available pretty much anywhere you get your books. So Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Kobo, and then in England you can also order it from Waterstones or Foyles or anywhere like that too.
Okay, so that was our interview. I would like to thank you for joining me on this episode of Chats with Kat. A very, very special thank you to our guest, Eva. Stay tuned for another episode of Chats with Kat every other Wednesday on the Voice of Adoptees podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, rate, and share this episode so that Ava's voice and novels can be heard, seen, and read. And always remember, someone somewhere is thinking of you. You are not alone.